Welcome to Beyond the Surface. My name is Ezra Gill, and I'll be joined by my co-host Ryan Mergener to begin our Season 1 finale, where we'll tackle the subject of leadership. We'll discuss the importance of leading ourselves before we lead others, and about what it means to be a leader without being given a title. This is a topic we are so excited to share on, so let's jump on in. Judges chapter 5 verse 2 says, "When leaders lead, the people willingly offer themselves. So bless the Lord." God uses leadership. He uses it in his church. He uses it in this whole world. He uses it with Christians. He uses it with non-Christians. Leaders are necessary for creating any sort of change, creating any sort of organization. And I've just found that like 99% of the problems here on earth are in some way attached to leadership problems. I just think leadership in its core definition simply means to influence. You don't need education. You don't need an endorsement from a company. A leader by definition is an influencer. If you have any sort of influence whatsoever, whether that be on your soccer team or whether that be your position at your work, whether it be your family and your kids, if you're a parent, hey, you're a leader. At your church, whatever that may be, you are a leader. So Ryan, why do you think it's important that leadership is discussed among Christians? Why do you think Christians need to study leadership, need to learn about how to be effective leaders?
First and foremost, like we're called to live different lives, right, than the rest of the world. And that in and of itself is leadership, kind of when you go a different way, when you do something different than everybody else, than the crowd. And Jesus set the example. He came and he served and he led while he was here on earth. So we want to be leaders and leading lives that God has kind of ordained for us. We want others to see that and to want to live the life that God has called them to. Like, this life is temporary and this life is short. If we as Christians don't show people who God is, they're not going to know. We may be the only piece of Jesus that somebody ever sees. Or, we might be the person that finally treats them with respect and in a way that says, where did that come from? I have questions. I want to know more about this. We know Jesus and they don't. So we need to remember that when we go about our day to day. And this doesn't mean, and this is something that I've struggled with too, just in wanting to have like influence in people's lives for the kingdom of God. We don't have to stand up and pastor a church and preach on Sundays. All of that's great. Absolutely need that kind of stuff out there. But I really think we can show a ton of leadership. And this is probably my favorite form of leadership, which we'll get into a little bit more later, is just leading by example. Doing that in your day-to-day lives and treating people with respect and kindness and really trying to love each and every person. You don't have to speak from a stage to do these kind of things. If every Christian was called into ministry, then so many people would miss out on God in the workplace, in their hobbies, and in all these different areas. So it's important that we remember that as Christians we lead these lives that God has called us to in the different areas that God has called us to, whether that be for me medicine, Ezra engineering, maybe you're called into something else like teaching, whatever it may be. We are still called to be leaders for God. And so I think that it's really important to address this as Christians, because each and every Christian should be a leader, just in the fact that God has called us to live different lives.
I love what you just said. Each and every Christian is a leader, because leadership is influence. Leadership is influencing. It's creating change. It's causing someone else to think differently, to look at things differently. Jesus saves people. Jesus is the savior. We're not the saviors.
Mm-hmm.
But what do? We lead people to the Lord. See, that's where that phrase comes from. We are the leaders stepping up and living our lives by example. You don't even have to have any sort of a title to be a leader. How do you lead without a title? How do you lead a team without being the team's delegated leader?
I feel like, especially in our culture and here in the United States, we have a really hard time with this idea that you can lead without a title. We really have this idea in this culture of you've got to put in your time, you've got to put in your work. The longer you've been here, kind of the more leadership and influence you have, et cetera, et cetera. But I think wherever you are at, whatever position you have, you can be a leader by being selfless, by putting others first, by working hard. You can't be doing this for yourself. You want to work hard so that you can get to where you want to be. but we're doing these things. We're being selfless, putting others first. We're working hard. We're really getting after it because that's what God's called us to do. God's called us to excellence in everything that we do. God's told us to put others first. God's told us to love. I think that when we show others that we respect them and we care about them and that you're willing to go the extra mile for them, they will follow you regardless of, whether or not you have a title, and they'll be more willing to take chances. They'll be more willing to grow into the people who they're called to be. They'll be more likely to treat others with respect. There's a book that I read. It's called Leaders Eat Last. It's by Simon Sinek. If you haven't read the book, I recommend that you read this. I don't care what you want to do with your life. I don't care kind of where you're at right now. I don't care if you think you're a great leader, a bad leader. I don't think there's a better book out there on leadership.
What's it called again?
It's called Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek.
Leaders Eat Last. I'm going to order this right now.
I recommend it for everybody. He's not a Christian author, but a lot of the things that he hits on would line up great, or do line up great, with biblical teaching, just in terms of, like, as a business leader, you want to put your staff first. And when you take care of your staff, then your staff will take care of other people. And that's ultimately what's going to sustain your business. Like I said, he's talking about it from a business perspective in terms of, how to create a successful business by leading by example. But that's kind of the same thing that, we find in the Bible. We want to take care of the people around us, and then those people will take care of the people around them. That's how you change the world right there. But the title of the book comes from the idea that in the Marines, the officers eat last. So the leaders of the Marines lets everybody else go before him. And, if you're out training and drilling and it's hot and you're starving, that's not an easy thing to do, especially when so much of society and of culture says, oh, you've been there the longest, you've put in more work than them to be the officer, so you should get to go first, and you've got more priorities and all this stuff, so you should go first so you can get out of there. But they say, no, we're going to let everybody else go first, and we're going to eat last. We're going to serve them. We're going to put them ahead of ourselves. And I think that when we adapt this mindset, and when it's genuine, it's not forced because we're trying to get other people to follow that, when people can see that we're being genuine with this, that's really
that's really key right there, that it's genuine and you're not to seek attention like, hey, look at me, I'm trying to be last.
Right. And ultimately, like, that's not sustainable. Number one, you're going to have a hard time doing that for a long time. And number two, like, people are going to see through that. And that's just going to kind of bite you in the butt in terms of leadership.
I'll give kind of a mindset. You talk about being selfless and about working hard. Everything you do is the biggest task in the world.
Yeah.
Whatever you put your hand to, whatever God has given to you is huge. Why? Because you're doing it. Wherever you're at is a big deal. Whatever you're doing, whoever you're speaking to right now, whatever conversation you're having, whatever bathroom you're cleaning up, or whatever floor you're sweeping, or whatever message you're about to deliver, or whatever phone call you're making, whatever you're doing at work, at school, at church, in sports, just casually hanging out with friends, is a big deal. Treat every room you enter into, every opportunity you have to serve should be done with excellence in your spirit. Not with trying to exalt yourself, because the Bible says whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Don't look around at everyone who's watching you. Just concentrate on what God has given in your hand. And I also want to put this out there. Good leaders are good followers. You can be a good follower and not be a good leader, but it's impossible to be a good leader without being a good follower. Sometimes the best thing you can do as a leader is just to follow. People see you following. They're going to follow you as you follow the delegated leader. I love how Paul writes, follow me as I follow Christ, implying that Paul himself is still a follower. If you can't follow, any delegated authority here on earth, how can you follow the greatest authority of all time?
So when I was a junior in college, the senior class had a group of guys that, due to like injuries and stuff like that, they had been there for, they were now in their fifth year of playing ball. So they'd been there for a little while, and they were captains. And they had been on a team when they were freshmen. They had been on a team that was very successful, went to a regional, which basically means making the playoffs. And so they had seen the success. And my previous 2 years, my freshman, sophomore year, we had not been a super successful team. My freshman year, we were like a 500 ball club. And then my sophomore year, we were a couple games over 500. So we were like mediocre. When these guys took over as captains my third year when I was a junior, the leadership totally changed. So it went from the freshmen doing kind of everything, like cleaning the bus after long road trips, gathering baseballs in the cage when everybody else hit them, cleaning up the field, getting to the field early to set up. It was kind of, I guess you could say, like an oppressive culture. Like a lot of sports culture is like this, just in the fact that like the seniors and the juniors had been there. They kind of put in more time so they could boss the younger guys around, and they had earned more privileges just simply because they had been there. But when this group of captains took over, there was three of them. They were three of the most hardworking people that I know, and they really cared about the team and the team as a whole. And that meant everybody. They didn't treat anybody different just because they were younger and they hadn't been on the team. They were the first people there, last people to leave. They were always helping clean up, helping set up. They were doing the things that really nobody else wanted to do. And they just really tried to promote a new culture of our team coming together and working together as a team and everybody having each other's backs. And it started with the captains. Like I said, they were willing to do these hard things. They had everybody else's back, had no problems going to the coach and addressing concerns that players had, etc. You really knew that they wanted to win and they wanted you to be a part of that, and that they wanted the team to really come together and gel well because they had the best interest in mind, because they didn't try to force it. Our team really did come together, and we had the most success out of any of the seasons that I had while I was there at school. We again made the playoffs, and we got really close to going to the Division II World Series. We won 3 games, and we were one of the last 3 teams left in our regional. So we had a lot of success on that team. We were a couple wins away from the school wins record. I mean, we had a really good season, and I truly believe that it's because we had leaders that had the whole team's best interest in mind.
Yeah, shout out to your captains. And I kind of have a somewhat of a similar story with my marching band director back in high school. Like, he demonstrated all the characteristics of an effective leader and just a beloved teacher in our school. I could go on and on about what he talked about, but there are just 2 things I just really want to highlight. And number one, his ability to remember names. Like, this guy holds the world's strongest memory. He never goes on autopilot when he's speaking to someone. You can see him storing the name of that person in his memory when he meets him for the first time. He rarely forgets anyone's names. If there are 25 Ryan Mergeners in the band, he will get to know each of them uniquely, what they play, what their interests are, what grade they're in. And I just think this is such an important quality of a leader. If you want to be taken seriously as a leader, you have to call people by their name. They're going to be way more attentive to you, even if they don't remember your name. And that starts by remembering the most important thing about themselves, which is their name. He made no excuses. He was like, oh, I'm going to remember everybody's name, as many as I possibly can. So the second thing that he did was that he displayed kindness greater than any other teacher, any other human being I've ever met. He was so kind. He was so humble. He was so loving. So he never sugarcoated his musical comments, or even if they were somewhat harsh, but he delivered them in a way that was respectful and that it was loving. He was giving criticism, but then saying how we can improve on them, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are. I believe in the positive, negative, positive. You say one thing they're doing good, one thing they can work on, and then I like your shoes or something. So he did a lot of that, and he taught us that. The Bible writes about how the greatest of all these things is love. If you stop loving people, then you need to stop leading them. Because if you don't love them, you'll probably use them. But if you love them, you're going to serve them.
One of the important things to just note here is that both of us have kind of hit on this. It's that we believe that as Christians, leadership kind of comes through service. That's something that both of us have hit. That's just super important, because obviously the greatest leader of all time in Jesus Christ was a servant. So how do you, or what do you do to lead yourself, and how do you move by your resolve instead of your feelings?
Consistency is one of the greatest characteristics of leadership, apart from love. Consistency. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to show up. Even if you're late, even if you're tired, even if you just don't feel like it, just show up to that shift. Go out, show up to that podcast recording, that rehearsal. Do what you gotta do. Just show up. Don't worry about what you have to do when you get there. Don't worry if you're unprepared. You'll know what to do, but you're only gonna know what to do when you're there. People are going to see she's been the first to arrive and has been the last to leave. Okay, I just got to say this. These friends who are like, they want to lead a Bible study, they want to serve in the church, they want to even deliver a message or something like that, but they're only showing up every other Sunday. Why do you think God is going to entrust you with leading some of his sheep when you're not showing up? Consistency. You got to show up. You got to be on time, especially. Nobody's going to take you seriously if you're not showing up on time, especially if you're consistently late. That would be really bad.
I didn't really want to go in this direction with it, but since we're kind of talking about feelings versus resolve, I think that in the political sphere, and I'm not going to turn this super political, but I just think in the political sphere, we see this amplified, and that's just that so many people make decisions based off their feelings in a given moment. We don't keep an end goal in mind. And when we do that, whether it's political, whatever it may be, when we make decisions based off of our feelings, we don't have that end goal in mind. And oftentimes that comes back to bite us with that end goal. The best thing that you can do as a leader is to keep your end goal in mind while moving forward one day / one step at a time. So let's just back it up. Let's take me, for example, because I think that this is just maybe a good iteration here. I may or may not get into medical school this year. Let's say hypothetically I don't get into medical school. There's two options on what I can do. I can pout and feel sorry for myself and make a lot of excuses about why I didn't get in. Or I can say, okay, well, I know that I can improve my application in this area, and in this area, and I can ask so-and-so for a letter of recommendation because I've worked closely with him for about a year now. Now, one of those options is based on feelings, and one of those is based on keeping my end goal in mind. That's really where you're going to make the biggest difference as a leader, is when you can learn to keep the end goal in mind while moving forward one step at a time, even when you don't feel like it, even when it's hard, even when you feel shorted or you feel like the cards are stacked against you. While that may look to be the case, we have a God that stands above all of it and who can move mountains, and he doesn't ask that we take on the impossible alone. Throughout any situation, he is with us. We just have to trust him and step when he calls us to step. You might not know what that looks like, the moment. It might be difficult to discern what he wants you to do, but God orders our steps. We don't have to get everything perfect. I think that can take a lot of weight off your shoulders as a leader when you come to just embrace that. When you come to just embrace that God doesn't call us to be perfect. God just calls us to do our best at trusting him. I went on way too long for this.
No, but feelings, they make great followers, but they make terrible leaders. So man, you can't be influenced just by temporary feelings. However you're feeling in the moment, it's going to pass. But a decision you make is going to bite you if you make it based on that feeling.
And I totally understand. I have made decisions based off feelings many, many times. I've gotten thrown out of baseball games for doing that.
Wait, you gotta tell us this story now.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just plenty of baseball players have had stories of being thrown out of games, but I was in a game where I had just kind of had it with the umpire. I and the majority of my team felt he was making bad calls for the entire game. It was later at bat in the game. It was like my third or maybe my fourth at bat in the game. Called a strike, and I thought it was pretty terrible. So I turned around to him and I just asked, I said, hey, is that as low as you're going to go? And I didn't say it bad.
You didn't.
This wasn't even really the bad part. I didn't say it in a bad way. It was really just a question is that as low as you're going to call strikes? Please tell me you're not going to call it any lower, kind of thing. He said, get back in the batter's box. And I said, no, I wanted to know, is that as low as you're going to call it, or does the zone go lower? And he said, get back in the batter's box. So I got back in, called what I thought was another bad strike. And I said something kind of under my breath. And he said, you say one more thing and I'm going to throw you out. And then the pitcher threw a couple balls in the dirt. Then he threw a pitch that I thought it was way outside, but the umpire rang me up on strike 3. So I flipped my bat around and I drew a line in the sand to say the ball crossed here. That's where you call that. It was garbage, basically.
You drew a line in the sand.
I drew a line in the sand. And
wow.
As I'm walking back to the dugout, I basically told him that His zone was terrible. Yeah, that was the end of the game for me. He told me to go back to the locker room. Yeah, that was decisions based on feelings. Just short story there. So I've done it before, made decisions based on feelings. Everybody's done it before. I'm not saying that we're going to be perfect. I am saying that there's two paths you can take, and one path is going to propel you forward, and one path is not.
Have you ever had the leadership success? Any moment in your, whether it be another baseball story, a moment where you were successful as a leader?
I'm going to default to baseball here because that's kind of where I've been tonight, and I like my baseball stories too. So I'm going to go.
Hey, our baseball fans are really going to be interested.
So I was a captain my senior year. Recently this year with this podcast and just a few other things is kind of like the most outspoken of a leader I've ever been. And I don't really consider that a ton my leadership style. I prefer to relate to people more one-on-one or in small groups versus outspoken to like a larger group of people, I guess. And that's kind of how I was as a captain too. I wasn't like the rah-rah kind of talking to the whole team kind of thing. But we had one kid on our team who was a really, really good hitter, but he was really struggling early on in the season. I mean, I remember he struck out and he was frustrated and he came in and he was getting upset in the dugout. And I just sat next to him on the bench. I said, "Hey, man, what's going on?" And he basically, he kind of yelled at me at first out of frustration in the moment, which happens. And then I said, "Dude, who cares? That's behind you now. You've got the rest of the day to go out and play better. So let's focus on that." He just kind of moved away from me. I didn't really think a whole lot of it. Like, I knew he was frustrated. I tried to help. I didn't know if my words really meant anything. He didn't have a great rest of the game. He was still frustrated. So after the game, we walked out and I just walked next to him and I said, let's have a moment and let's just reflect what happened in that game. Why was that game so bad? Why were you so frustrated? And we talked about it a little bit. It still didn't really feel like in the moment that I got anything across to him or like I helped at all. But later that night, I did get a text from him and he said, "Hey, I really appreciate you not just yelling at me in front of everybody else or talking to the whole team basically about my mistakes or anything like that. I really liked how you just kind of sat down and talked to me individually." And he apologized for getting frustrated earlier. And he just said that he did think that it was nice just that I showed that I cared about him more than just his play by taking the time to talk to him individually. So I would say that was probably a success. And I can't remember when he turned it around, but eventually he broke our school home run record that season.
No way. He went from zero to hero, I suppose.
I mean, and there was more to it than like a simple conversation in the dugout. That's all I'm going to say about that.
That's so cool because I think this is an important quality of leaders is that they are able to see any sort of challenges and they see opportunity. And you didn't do what everyone else would have done, which would just yelled at him. And no, you actually really talked things out. You did a moment of reflection and you really strategized with him. That's so important that leaders, they see problems as opportunity. They see something different with their perspective, or seeing problems, seeing any sort of a challenge with another teammate and seeing it as an opportunity for growth. Thanks for tuning in to Beyond the Surface. Next week, we'll finish our discussion on leadership and officially conclude Season 1. So be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube to catch the next episode. If this was encouraging to you, we'd love it if you shared with a friend or on your socials. We'll see you next week in Beyond the Surface for the final episode of Season 1.